This is Boulder County Council Candidate Forum, sponsored by and partnered by 6 groups. Intercambio, de Comunidades de Boulder, the Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center, the Nation Report, Boulder Rights Watch, the NAACP, Showing Up for Racial Justice, SURJ. Thank you so much for partnering with us. Tonight we have 4 council members, candidates who dared to show up tonight. We really appreciate that. We know the questions are complicated and they're intense and they'll be challenging to answer, but with the mission statements of the partners, we really wanted to have answers to these questions and also highlight some of the issues that we work with.
Is your mic on?
I think so. I turned it
Okay.
on.
Okay.
That was on.
I think it just needs to be closer to your mouth.
Testing. Is that better? Or the same?
You might have to hold it.
Testing.
There you go.
Okay. So we'll begin with 1-minute introductions. And then we will try to get through as many questions as we can. Our questions are focused on social justice issues and equality. And the candidates have had the questions mailed to them today, so they've been able to, I'm sorry, except for John Gerstle, he said that he didn't get them, but he looked at them earlier this evening. So if we can, and then we'll alternate also. So if you could start with Sam, will you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi there, my name is Sam Weaver, and I'm running for re-election to the Boulder City Council. 3 of the big focus areas for me are climate action, affordable housing, and social justice issues. And I'll talk about one of the social justice issues that I was pretty happy that we could take some action on, and that has 2 parts. So with Laurel here pushing us, the council adopted sustainability wages, so $15 an hour wages for all contractors for the city as a minimum. And so we were able to go through the process of figuring out how we were going to implement that with custodial staff, with seasonal workers, and there's still some of that in process, but most of it has been done. And so I was pleased that we were able to do that. And as a result of looking at that and the complexities around the emergency service workers in our town, who are paid very poorly by the ambulance services, the private ambulance services they work for, we're taking steps to bring those folks in-house with our fire department. So it would be better for the community, there will be better service because people will stay typically longer in those jobs, so they'll be better trained and then they'll be paid much better than they would have been in the private service. So that's a quick intro. Thank you.
Hello, I'm John Gerstle. I am running for council as someone who's lived in Boulder for over 60 years. And the main reason I'm running is to encourage Boulder to continue with its pay-it-forward attitude, both towards its natural environment and its social environment. I understand that this group is primarily concerned with the social and economic aspects of living in Boulder, and I have a variety of thoughts on that I expect I'll be able to share with you in the course of the evening. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mark McIntyre. I'm running for council. I'm a 40-year resident of Boulder County, of the city of Boulder. Raised my kids here, went to school here, graduate of CU. I have parents and in-laws here that are elderly, so I'm kind of familiar, and grandkids here, so I'm familiar with the kind of full spectrum, at least from an age standpoint, of and somewhat from an economic standpoint with my in-laws and so forth. So I'm familiar with the city of Boulder and Boulder County. And the reason I'm running is, in a general sense, I'm a believer that we can struggle and fight and fail if we try to fight against change and turn back the clock. I'm a believer that change is inevitable, change is coming, our community is changing, families are changing, transportation and housing systems are changing, and we need leadership to guide that change for the greater good.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jan Burton, and I've been on the council now for 2 years. And it took me not that long to figure out what was going on. Have any of you looked at a council package? I hear some giggling. Yeah, they are overwhelming. One of my top 3 focuses is on governance. And there are some questions that have to do with governance from my perspective. How do we recruit and involve people of color, people who are different, into our system? And if you look at all 14 candidates, they look a lot like us. Mainly white. Well, only white. So one of the things I would encourage you to think about as you think about who you're going to vote is how open are they to learning? Because 2 years ago, I had no idea about a lot of the problems that we're going to talk about tonight. Zero idea. But what I was committed to learning and listening. And that is what I continue to be committed to, is how much can I learn by listening to people like you and other people in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Beginning with John, would you talk about your funding, and have you felt it necessary to return any of your campaign contributions?
My campaign funding is in accordance with the city's regulations for maximum amounts from any single party and total maximum amount. So my funding has been a series of small donations, none exceeding $100, and the total amount is $10,000, and that has meant that I qualify for the city matching funds of $10,000 for a total campaign budget of $20,000.
Thank you.
I haven't had any excess, and so I haven't returned or done anything else with excess funds.
This way,
Yes.
that way, this way. Mark McIntyre again. So I'm a big believer in the city's campaign finance program. I really learned about it just as I began my campaign, but as I delved into it, I thought, this is fantastic. This is what we need. We need a 75-day campaign that has strict limits and is publicly financed partially. And anyway, I just think what we have here in our little city should be a model for state and national campaigns. So I have not quite reached my $10,000 limit for raising funds. I'm close. And yes, I've had to return funds. I had someone just the other day forget that they donated a month ago and were enthusiastically supporting me and sent me another donation. I had to return it. I've also had because of the regulations, husband-wife donations, if they're done separately, can be $200. But if they're done together, that's a no-no. So I've had to return $100 of a $200 husband-wife donation.
Jan Burton, does everyone know that there's a total spending limit of $20,000? So that's what it is, $20,000, and the way it makes up, Mark referred to $10,000. If you basically raise $10,000 in all increments under $100, you can accept no contribution more than $100. And that includes corporations. Now, there have been some finger pointing about people being bought up by millionaires and corporations and all that stuff. That's just not possible, because you can't accept anything over $100. And they don't allow you to accept $100 from a company and $100 from another company that's owned by the same guy. So, like what both John and Mark have said, we've got very clean campaign rules here. The same thing happened to me. I had one person who sent me a second check, forgetting that she had given me one before, and I sent it right back to her, reminding her that there's a $100 limit. So I agree. We have a wonderful system here. There's no way a politician can be bought off by anyone for $100.
Hi, Eric Budd. I'm sorry I'm late. Let me answer the question. Would it be okay if I did an intro? I went to a different location than
Sure.
what I had on the schedule. So the question is about our campaign finance system. Trying to think of what hasn't been said. I'll just say that one of the big things when I was running my campaign from the very beginning was I wanted to get broader participation in the system. And so I was the only candidate actively going out on social media and through my networks and asking for $5 donations. And I think the campaign limits that we have, $100 maximum per person is great. But in some ways, I want more people to participate than just writing $100 checks. And so I think it's a really good thing that in the digital age we can use some new technology and really get people involved and get people to buy into campaigns and have people power campaign. Sorry, Spike's here from Second Presbyterian. Any guidelines on the intros? 1 minute. I'm Eric Budd. I'm really running because I want to see a diversity of people that can still live and work in Boulder. I want to see a middle class in Boulder. I want to see Boulder diversify racially, economically, a lot like the rest of what's happening in Boulder County. We're not seeing it in our city. And I think that's a problem. We need to push forward on policy that keeps Boulder accessible to all people. And those are really important to me. I really support a lot of new ideas and new thinking, and making sure that we really have a welcoming community. So let's say a bit more there. Thank you.
Can you pass it down? There you go.
So they pretty much covered it all. I have had to return a couple of checks. One person didn't know about the $200 limit, and so I returned, the $100 limit, and she wrote me a $200 check, so I returned the entire check, actually, because I was pretty close to my limit that I could go to. It is a great system. It promotes lots of people being involved in small dollar donations. Most of my donations were not $100 donations. They were $25 or $50 donations. And I think the subtext of this question really is, who's donating to the campaign? Do you have corporate donors? And all of my donors are individual. There may be one LLC in there, or maybe one from a solar company. I'd have to go look. But almost all of the donations to my campaign came from individuals. What do they call them in court? Real persons? Natural persons, that's it.
Sam, I appreciate the subtext. So I appreciate that. That's what we really were getting at. So if we could start with Mark this time, please. Supreme Court Justice Stevens ruled in 1999 that the Constitution provides the right to enter one state and leave another, the right to be treated as a welcome visitor rather than a hostile stranger. Without an answer to the question, sleep where, we at Boulder Rights Watch believe we are kicking the problem of addressing our unhoused community needs to law enforcement, and they clearly question the success of doing so. Chief Testa himself said recently that he thinks there are very legitimate questions raised by directions to enforce the camping ban. But people still exist, and this is according to Testa. We give a warning or we give a ticket. It doesn't solve anything. All it does is displace somebody, unquote. Sheriff Kelly was also quoted recently, quote, jail is an expensive solution. I can't even call it a solution. It's an expensive option. I understand the frustration Boulder is facing with people who ignore the summonses and won't do the programs and won't pay the fines and won't change their behavior, but there's got to be more to it. I'm not sure this is a problem we're going to enforce our way out of. To continue, the city and homeless service providers' current plan to address homelessness in Boulder will focus a majority of resources on 20% of those who use, we are told, 80% of the resources. We are concerned that concurrent with the announcement of this plan, City Manager Brodigan directed the police, costing an estimated $315,000 to sweep areas homeless people congregate, resulting in an uptick of arrests of people experiencing homelessness. This occurred as resources like the Day Shelter and Boulder Outreach for Homeless Overflow, operating out of churches and synagogues, saw the city end funding for those services. So the questions that follow that are, we'll try to get through them, are 4. Number 1, will you support a homeless Bill of Rights at the state level, allowing people to sleep safely in their cars and in public spaces without obstructing right of way? And we'll take those one at a time. Mark?
So, Mark McIntyre. So, I am uncertain and undecided in regard to this particular question of what the question is specifically on allowing people to sleep in their cars if they don't obstruct the right of way and supporting a bill at the state level. So, having not seen such a bill or read such a bill or been able to study up on it, I'm not going to commit one way or the other on it, but I'd certainly evaluate it. But certainly our homelessness policies have taken a step forward in recent months, and different than what is kind of portrayed here. I think our coordinated entry system is a good thing, and I'm sure we'll talk about it some more. But anyway, I am encouraged by the city's activities to house the homeless and to help people reach permanently affordable housing solutions.
Burton. I'm kind of with Mark. I don't know about this particular Bill of Rights. I went on a trip to Portland and Eugene. Several of you here were on that trip too. And in Eugene, we did hear about places where people could lawfully sleep in their cars. That to me is a no-brainer. We should have that in every city, not just at the state level. And I would support that in Boulder. In regards to public spaces, I would need to know more about that. I think residents here are concerned about people sleeping in parks if they have to walk through in the middle of the night and that kind of thing. And I think I am much more agreeable with the things that are below here that I think we should be taking on, and I have already voted for. So I guess what I would say on that is I am very concerned about the homeless. I don't want them sleeping out when it's cold and when they can freeze. And their safety is a very high concern. But we have to balance that with what the residents of the community want. And so we have to find real solutions, not just saying you can be in every public right away.
Thanks, Eric Budd. The biggest thing that I would like to see is ways that we can promote people from sleeping on the open space and using our public resources that way. And I think I also watched the video in Eugene, and I think the biggest thing that I took out of that was that it's really hard. It doesn't make sense to lock people up or to punish people when we're not giving other adequate options. And I think some of those options I want to look at first are, can we provide small parts of town where we have some very low cost type of housing that's for traditional type of housing? Can we provide a small area for camping that's meant to be temporary and give people some options? I think that's trying to attack all parts of the problem. We have really good policies we're putting into place for the long-term homeless, and we need to keep working along the chain of different groups of folks. Folks that are just traveling through the community. And I think at some level we want to support folks as a community, but we know that there's probably going to be a certain level that as a community we can support. And so it's really, I agree, it's finding that balance.
So I've been pretty pleased with the direction that the city has taken pretty recently, not just with the addition of 50 beds, which will be used for the navigation services and the coordinated intake that will take place. So we've added significantly to the inventory of beds that people can sleep in who find themselves without shelter. The focus here is on exits. So one of the changes in tone and the 20% that will be put into program beds that need shelter the most and need support the most, they will get case management at the shelter, which is not something that has been done for every resident of the shelter up till now. And I think that case management is really important to getting people to actual exits from an unsheltered situation. And so the other thing that our housing director has done, he's quite good, he's fairly new, he went out right away because we're focused on exits. He was nervous that there wouldn't be places for people to exit to, even if they were able to resolve some or part of all of their situation. So he procured 35 vouchers from HUD. So the city put in $200,000 matched with $400,000 from HUD, and we now have 35 brand new vouchers to be able to take people who stabilize their situation out of the shelter and into a full-on housed situation. And I think that's progress. It's steps in the right direction. In addition to all of this, BOHO went out of existence for other reasons besides funding. We turned the funding around and did a summer sheltering program, Path to Home, which the city funded 100% in order to be able to practice the navigation services that we want to provide going forward in the new system.
I'm John Gerstle. I support the city's program, which Sam described quite nicely, but I think it's not complete. I think there are two other categories of folks that the city needs to be more active in dealing with respect to homelessness. The category that the city is appropriately dealing with, I like to describe as those who can be socially productive, given a little bit of assistance. If they have some place to live and to get started and to get themselves going in a stable location. But there are two other categories that I would like to see more attention paid to. That is those folks who may have mental or physical problems that prevent them from realistically becoming self-supporting, productive members of society. And those, I think, we have a moral and human and cultural obligation to take care of, and we just need to recognize that. And whether it's the state or the county or the city who has to come up with the resources for that is unclear, but I think if the others don't do it, we need to do it. And then the third category is what some folks might characterize as travelers, people who are coming through in a temporary situation and are here because it's a nice place, but they don't regard themselves, nor do others regard them as permanent residents of Boulder. And those, I think, are causing a lot of concern, and I don't think the city has adequately dealt with them. One thing that I would think the city should consider, and this is for the sake both of general public health and safety, is to provide some camping place where sanitary and water and heating facilities are available. And the reason for that is manifold, but the one that may be politically most acceptable in Boulder is to stress the public safety element of that. And that is, these folks then presumably won't be out in the open space camping, and they won't be camping along Boulder Creek, the Boulder Creek path, because the city won't allow it. Instead, they will be taken to a place to be designated with these facilities. And okay, I'm running out of town. That's my thoughts.
Irene, can I answer the next three questions together? Mark answered, you answered the last one.
Yeah, so I answered the first one.
I think I could answer 2, 3, and 4, if you want me to.
They're all related.
Yeah.
I agree.
Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay. The questions, and I can. Yeah. Irene, you want me to read them? Or do you want to read
And
them?
I'll go ahead.
Okay.
And then you'll have a minute and a half. Will you support a tiny home village on city property, several locations having been identified? Will you support a tiny home village on city property? Several locations having been identified as possibilities by city staff for a pilot effort. Number 3 is, will you support a camp for people experiencing homelessness on city property?
Okay, question number 1, will you support a tiny home village on city property? I'm one of 2 people who voted to do that. So yes, I know not only support it, but I did support it, I voted for it. However, we didn't get to do that. Number 2, the camping. Yes, I would support that. Like John said, I think that would be a good way to give people a safe place to sleep, and not on the open space and in parks and that kind of thing. I would charge a minimal amount, and I would, for both of those, I would have a nonprofit or I would have the homeless actually be managing those locations. So self-managed. And then I want to talk also about housing in general, because housing is causing this problem, a lack of housing. Now, obviously, there are other problems associated with it, but we have the most restrictive ADU policy in the nation, by far. And I have been talking out about it. There are some very creative ideas coming out in other parts of the country about the use of accessory dwelling units. For example, in Los Angeles, they're paying residents, the city is paying residents $60,000 to put an ADU in their backyard and house a homeless person. They figure that is less expensive than everything else. Number 2, in Seattle, they're piloting a little, they call it a tiny home or something. It's like an ADU, very cost effective, about $30,000, and they've set up this whole program where a neighborhood adopts a homeless person. They make the choice of which yard this goes into, and the whole neighborhood supports that homeless person. So that not only gives a house to support the person, but a social structure that supports his or her success in coming out of homelessness. I think this community should step up to creative ideas like this, and I would definitely be moving that forward. And then the final question is, yep, I supported bathrooms. I said we should have bathrooms, more bathrooms, and I still say that. I think it's a normal bodily function that all of us have to do, and it's not safe, and it's not, it's just not sanitary to have people doing their business next to the creek, and it's not fair to them. So yes, I am, and in regards to the police, I always thought it was better to not have police who are out talking to the homeless. I think it makes sense to have social services people doing that rather than. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Jan. You gave an incredible answer. I'm 100% in agreement with everything. To say a little bit more, on the need for a tiny home village, I think really, and thanks Mike Conner and Darren for sharing the video and going on that Portland and Eugene, Oregon trip. I think that was really instructive for me, and just how we can build these community type of organizations that's not just housing, but it's also a support structure. And that's incredibly important to me. And also some of the things that they went through in that process in their visit was the cost of construction of these homes, how they could put them in places that were off using their own water and off the power grid, and doing some really innovative things that were both cost effective for housing, because housing costs in our city are just incredibly high, and also just really a humane way to bring people along and have a community around it. And so I think that's a great solution. Also looking at the some sort of solution for camping as well. And I need to learn a little bit more about the implementation of that. But I think, again, looking for low-cost ways to provide human services is going to be incredibly important for us going forward. Totally in agreement on bathrooms on places like the creek path, and just the problems that we could potentially have around the health of our community and contamination of our water, I think are real, and we should be proactive on that. So that is absolutely something I support.
So Mary, if you would just do an introduction, a 1-minute introduction, and then we're going to move on to another subject, and we'll go back to Bert, so you'll have an opportunity to answer that.
Great. I'm Mary Young, and I'm running for re-election to the council. I've served for 4 years, and I would love to be re-elected to serve for another 4 years to work on the issues that I really care about, which is racial justice, and I'm going to quit using the words diversity and inclusion, because what we really need is race and class. And we need to start having those difficult conversations that make every one of us uncomfortable.
And we need to come back to say
Here.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'll start with the easiest one of these. Bathrooms I absolutely supported, and it was there was a lot of resistance there by city staff to the bathroom issue, and I didn't really understand it, so we eventually got there, and so that's good, and I think we need to look at solutions like Denver has for portable showers as well. I think that's another no-brainer. I never answered the question before about the homeless Bill of Rights. I support people being able to sleep in their cars, but not necessarily in public spaces. I think we need other solutions for that. So I do support the tiny home village concept. It's a location that we need to find that would underpin that. In Boulder, housing affordability is largely driven by land affordability, and it's not the cost of construction that kills everyone, it's the cost of land. And we've been land banking, so I think we need to be creative about the possibility for that. So the self-managed tiny home village and what's going on in Denver, I want to see how that works as well. So we had a live experiment on tiny home villages just down the road, so it shares our climate, it shares the other issues that we need to look at. So yeah, I also think we need to realize that half of the homeless in Boulder County are families. And so those are the ones who are often sleeping in cars, they're often sleeping in people's couches temporarily, and we use EFA, the Emergency Family Assistance Association, to focus the support there for homeless families. I also, on the policing front, I feel like Greg Test has tried to get really creative with the homeless outreach team, so they don't do enforcement. They want to know who is in the homeless community so that the unsheltered feel willing to report things that might be happening in the homeless community where somebody is taking advantage of somebody else. So I thought it was really important to have trusted peace officers that the unsheltered can work with.
Can I look at that?
Yeah.
I think you've heard people talk about it already. I would say I support the concept of sleeping in cars. I support the concept of a camp, providing sanitary and hygienic and safety facilities for campers. With respect to tiny homes, I am open to the idea, but it has not been clear to me that it is the most efficient or desirable way to accomplish what we are trying to do. And part of the reason for my comment there is that it takes up more land than other potential solutions. And so I would like to make sure that it's a realistic approach for our needs in Boulder. What other question?
Bathrooms.
Oh, I do support putting bathrooms along Boulder Creek and in other public areas. And when I say, and I refer that to most other cities where there are public facilities available for folks, and I think wherever you have lots of public use of an area, it's our obligation to provide sanitary facilities as well.
So I agree with everything Jan said, and thinking about some things. When I first came to Boulder 40 years ago, my first dwelling was a tent in the campground in El Dorado Canyon, because I was a climber. And the climbing community lives out of vans, lives out of their vehicles, and lives in tents. And you had a choice. You could camp in El Dorado, you could camp at the mouth of 4 Mile, and you had a KOA here in town. You had a broad range of camping facilities, and it's been stunning to me that as this outdoor community and a climbing community, and we just have a lot of outdoor people that really like camping. And we have travelers come through that like camping as well, that may not be appropriate to overnight shelter them at the shelter or some other resource. We need to have more camping, and I think if we had a great camping area and maybe a mix of campgrounds for tents and teeny houses, and then you could offer people that had no income vouchers to use that sort of facility. But it wouldn't have to be just a homeless facility. We could have a great camping area. As far as restrooms on the creek path, of course, that's a no-brainer. I would also add that as a city service, as part of our parks, recreation, and creek pathway maintenance, we should also have trash cans, which in fact would help. A lot of times you go through an underpass and there's someone's, takeout food container or whatever. Anyway, sure, let's encourage good behavior and give them the facilities to participate in that good behavior. Yeah, that's it. Okay.
Mary, do you have a handle of what the issues, the questions were?
Yeah, and I want to step back from the minutia of how to solve homelessness in Boulder, because we wouldn't be in this place if we didn't have the severe income inequality that we have in this country. And we need to start addressing that. We need to address the concentration of wealth in this country on a very, very small portion of the population. And if we address that, a lot of these issues would go away. We can't solve these issues in Boulder. Anything that we do is a tiny, tiny little Band-Aid. And it's very frustrating. And every time that we talk about this on council, I get very, very frustrated because, A, we're never going to be able to spend the right amount of money that it takes to solve homelessness. The real solution to homelessness is for all cities in this country to do it in tandem. And that's probably not going to happen. Sure, I can support these Band-Aids, but what's it really going to do? It's going to improve lives, yes, for sure, definitely, for a few people. But is it going to solve homelessness? No. So I really think that what we need to do is start addressing those issues of the concentration of wealth and the income inequality that we have in this country.
So are you yes or no on providing camps or allowing people to sleep in their cars?
I think that people should be allowed it. People are already sleeping in their cars, more than we know. So yes, I think they should be allowed to, but they're doing it already. Should we have a tiny home village? Sure, and as Sam said, the issue is where would we put it? A lot of the folks that are homeless, and this is what I have, my understanding is that 30% are people with mental health issues, 30% are people with substance abuse issues, and 30% have issues of circumstantial losing jobs, things like that. So there need to be supportive services around to help folks, because people, I work with people that are that don't know how to approach the system, and when you don't know how the system works, it's impossible to get help. Just a simple, very simple process of trying to get an accessorite card. How many of you know what an accessorite card is? Exactly. And that's a transportation service that the district is, it's the ADA service, the Americans with Disabilities Act required transportation service. Just to get that, people don't even know that it's accessible. And that if you have an accessorite card, you can then use the bus for free. And that all you have to do is enter like 4 simple things online, and you get the application to do that. Now, that's the first step. Anyway, my point is that navigating the systems are very difficult. And so if you're going to have a tiny home village, you need to have that help, that navigation help that helps you work through our onerous and very fragmented and painful system that you need to be unemployed full-time to be able to just get from one place to another. So, I can answer the rest of these questions, but it feels frustrating for me because, yeah, we can have a tiny little impact, but without making great strides on the income inequality and the injustices, it doesn't really matter.
Okay, we need to move on. Just for your information, the Homeless Bill of Rights will be introduced again this year in the state legislature, so you might want to brush up on that if you want to be able to. Also, I got a message that people on the live stream are having trouble hearing, so if you would raise your voices a little bit for them. Within the Hillard-Hines report, it was found that the police in Boulder have several points of racial bias or lack of information. How do you plan to address this? What would be your measure of success? And
Who's up? Eric.
Yes.
and this is Eric Brown.
I think part of the challenge with what we see in racial bias is that we really see this as people of color in our community are essentially being put through the system in a way that's really in a way that you can see that racial profiling has an effect, whether or not it's directly being used by the police force or not. And you can see that we have policies in place, things like the smoking ban, things that are really giving the police tools to be able to that are sometimes used in ways that are not really equal in our community. And I want to make sure we're putting in policies that are like the funding that we have for police cameras, and really looking and making sure that we have ways to continue to measure the racial disparity that we see in our policing. The measurement of success for me is going to be that monitoring these policies, that we're actually seeing a change and a reduction in the disparity that we're seeing compared to the population makeup in our community, along with the actual rate of both stops and incarcerations that we're seeing.
Here.
So I think it's safe to say that I'm the only person of color in this room. So I'm going to step into, there's Nikhil. So you were hiding behind somebody, I didn't see you. But I'm going to step into a place of discomfort and just say that everybody has racial bias. It's inherent in our system. We have a system of institutional racism that, like the issue of income inequality needs to be addressed. And the issue of income inequality and racism are closely tied because of institutional racism, income inequality and poverty disproportionately affects people of color. So yes, the police force has racial bias, and it was established that the police force has racial bias, but we all do. And the sooner we start to recognize the little things that we do, and I'll give you an example. Just walking into this room, I saw those pictures along the wall of people of color and people in poverty. And I refer to those as pity posters, because that's what we do. That's what we do. We put people in poverty and people of color as people that should deserve our pity, when in reality, people in poverty and people of color know resilience and know strength better than most people. in this room.
And you're a little bit over.
Okay, sorry. I get passionate about this stuff.
Okay, thanks.
So the Hillard-Hines report is a pretty interesting piece of work. It's always useful to review. I think the key finding that struck me the most, and this goes right to what the measure of success would be, is that despite data unavailability and inconsistency, we believe that an African American person is approximately twice as likely to be cited for a traffic or misdemeanor offense than we would expect based on community demographics. So that's the key finding for me that needs to change. There's a whole bunch of other ones, which are all valuable, and in fact, in the October update that we received, which was October 2016, from the police department and the city manager, they talked about what they're doing to try and remedy the situation, and it includes a lot of community outreach and letting people know about the professional standards review panel openings, making sure that we're soliciting broadly for people to be on that committee. I agree with Mary, however, that this is a prevalent problem, and it goes beyond just our police force, even though that's what Hillard-Hines focused on, because one that we may talk about as well is the community perception assessment. And so that talks more broadly about people of color feeling uncomfortable in Boulder for reasons of both race and of class. And so we need to focus on the policing part, but we need to focus on the broader issues as well. And I think the policing part is pretty well covered. I mean, the steps that we're taking could move us to where we need to be, and the way we'll measure that is we'll start taking better data. And what was interesting as I went and reread this was that data will not be collected in a way that's scientific necessarily, because the recommendation best practices are that it's an officer observation about the race or ethnicity of the person, because it can make them uncomfortable to ask the question and make it seem like there's bias in the policing.
Reminder to speak up. Reminder to speak up, love.
Okay.
Thank you.
John Gerstle here. I think Sam described the situation quite nicely. I'd like to comment most on the update that was done a year ago, last October. And it seems to me that what is going on now is entirely appropriate with the police department in their attempts to improve their behavior and relationships with the community, also based on racial conditions. But what really came to me out of that update and the report itself was the very poor data that forms the basis for this analysis. And I would say the most important thing, in addition to this change in attitude and behavior, is to improve the data collection. And as Sam described, sometimes attempting to collect the data affects the situation that people are trying to deal with, such as asking someone's race in the middle of a police incident. So it's not a straightforward matter at all. But I think that's essential if we want to reach any coherent conclusions. But beyond that, I'd like to also say that Mary's analysis of the situation is excellent. And although the Hillard-Hines report focuses on one very small aspect of relations among folks in Boulder, I think Mary's analysis is much more fundamental, and we need to keep that in mind also.
Mark McIntyre. And I want to comment on Mary's thoughts as well, that all the issues we're dealing with here have been exacerbated by a dysfunctional healthcare system. So homelessness, people sick, injured on the street with incredible mental health problems. If we had a true single-payer system or a true universal healthcare system, maybe we wouldn't be addressing some of these issues tonight. And race is another one that we need to address, and we're addressing it now, but in all the wrong ways. So in regard to the Hillard-Hines report, it was interesting. last night we were all at a candidate forum on the Hill, and some of the homeowners on the Hill, you know, they have their own set of issues, and it's not so much with homelessness, but it's with fraternities and sororities and wild parties and so forth. And one of the things that in talking to them and in talking here tonight, what we need is policing that the community trusts and believes is fair, regardless of race, regardless of economic status. And that is a goal that, is almost unobtainable with policing, because our police are human and they come with their sets of biases. But through training and through a community culture, I think that's achievable. So trust and fairness, trust in our police and fairness from our police force are the key elements. And to know whether or not we have that, implementing the recommendations of the Hillard-Hines report, and most specifically the data collection, so that we can in turn evaluate our progress in trust and fairness is what's key.
I agree with what everyone has said, so I'm not going to blow her around, I'm just kind of repeating, but I think the city takes the Hillard-Hines report seriously. I certainly do, and I endorse it. As John and Sam mentioned, it was about data, and we are collecting data. Now, what we have to do is get to reviewing that data and see how we're doing metrics-wise against our goals. I know people of color do not feel comfortable here with the police, and that's something that the City Council has got to make very clear that we want to change that, and the city manager needs to be measured on that as well. So I think that's a key thing. Thank you.
Didn't I already?
Yeah, I think we've gone around the loop.
Okay.
But I can talk more about it.
I'll catch you one-on-one. So regarding the inclusivity report, within the recent inclusivity report commissioned by Boulder, it was found that the city is unwelcoming to people of color who report a variety of microaggressions and biases throughout Boulder. How do you plan to address these, and what would you use to measure success?
So again, you know, the assessment told us something that I think many of us already knew in a way. It just codified it in the different ways it happens. So mostly people feel physically safe in Boulder was one of the conclusions of the report, but people of color don't feel welcome here. And it's not just people of color, but people who are low income as well reported not feeling welcome. So there were two kinds of discomfort reported, and that's what resulted in the assessment that that there are populations that feel unwelcome. Another point is affordability is a huge concern. So for lower income people, it's not just about them feeling uncomfortable in retail establishments because people will either follow them around or they feel unfairly singled out due to their race, but it's also are they welcome in Boulder to live because can they afford a house or can they afford the rents in Boulder? And so the policy prescriptions for this are, I think, also fairly good. They talk about governance. They talk about how we recruit people who are lower income or people of color into our boards and commissions and into our city council. And then building community. You know, how do we make sure that the different income levels and the different races are mingling with each other and they're in all of the neighborhoods. So in other words, you know, something to think about, do you want to put affordable housing off-site when you're building housing projects? Or should it be the case that if you're building big enough projects and you can get it financed, that the affordable housing is on-site so that you have a range of incomes?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And if I could just add, if you could be heavy on your action items when you address this question, that would help us.
Okay.
Well, I think Sam gave a very good description of the situation and potential ways to deal with it. The one I would focus on is actually a proactive education campaign by the city to let people know what sort of behavior microaggression is and how unwelcome and inappropriate it is. In addition, the housing aspect with the on-site versus off-site housing, I think plays a very important role also. But if it was up to me, I would have the city doing a very proactive public education effort on this topic.
So, I'm a product of white privilege. Let's just, right? I come from a family that has money. I live in a town that's white. My children have benefited from my income. So, so my experience and what I can bring to the table in terms of what someone of color experiences as microaggressions, I'm no expert in that. Let's put it that way. So I make no claim. Specifically on a microaggression, by its very nature, these subtle, these small, but potentially intimidating things are hard to measure and even harder to measure success in correcting them. So I go back to a broader community view of if we want to be a welcoming community, if we want to do more than hang out a multilingual welcome sign, that requires real action on housing affordability and transportation options. And when I say more flexibility in housing options and transportation, I'm talking about what we've been talking about a little bit earlier, accessory dwelling units, ways that someone, an older person can stay in their home by having a younger person, someone that was formerly homeless, whatever, living in their house in a safe, economical accessory dwelling unit that's legal. Talking about transportation options. You know what? Getting around in a car is a very expensive thing. If we have a community that has citywide eco-passes, or we just dispense with the eco-pass altogether and just have free bus service, that is something that brings economic equality to our city and makes it more welcoming. And choosing not to have a car, we've got to be welcoming of that as well. And I'm a committed cyclist, and you know what? When you look around, there are two groups of people that ride their bikes an awful lot in Boulder. Yeah. Old white guys like me and Hispanics that live in the trailer parks because that is their form of transportation. And we need to improve our transportation infrastructure for them just as much as for me.
One of the things I mentioned when I started was that when I got elected to city council, I didn't know what I didn't know. And you could have knocked me over with a feather if someone would have told me that there was racial bias in this community, because I didn't see it. So one of the things that I have learned in the last 2 years from some of my friends who are people of color is that there is very real bias here, and there is even physical violence. And that is sickening to know. So I think one of the most important things is to not be silent. The county had a program about a month ago called Invisible Boulder County, and they did a great job with a panel discussion about raising the issue that we cannot be silent and that we have to talk up. So that's number one. What I try to do is talk up and not be silent. Number two, one of the things that I want to do in terms of governance is empower our boards and commissions more. And we have a Human Relations Commission that is made up of really good people who understand this, and the City Council and the city need to be empowering them more to take steps and to educate the community more. So those are the two things that I would do.
Hi, Eric. I think a couple of the actions. I think in a lot of ways this comes down to our leadership and our leaders and who we are promoting in our community. And we've seen this at the federal level. We've seen the absolute lack of moral leadership. We've seen, honestly, terrible steps backwards. And I think it's important to elect leaders to our city council who are very willing to engage and speak out on this topic. This is something that I've used Twitter for extensively, is to talk about these issues. And also to learn from people and to promote people in my Twitter feed who are underrepresented. And that's someone that I am, and I will keep doing now in City Council. I really agree on the housing front that we have to acknowledge the racial history of housing in this country. And we know we're not going to solve that problem by itself, but we know that the restriction and the restrictions and lack of accessibility we put on housing in our community has contributed to this problem. In a lot of ways, you see how Colorado and Boulder County is diversifying, and we just aren't. And the reason is because it's so expensive to live here. And the last thing I'll say, so I want to work on that problem. And the last thing is, I've knocked on a lot of doors in mobile home parks, and I see that as a place that actually has a lot of racial and economic diversity. And we need to support those communities. We need to support the hubs in Boulder that actually have diversity and make sure that we do everything we can to support them and keep them here.
So I've lived here for over 35 years, and I'm shaking. I'm shaking right now. And I hope that I'm not the only one that's really uncomfortable talking about race. But that's what we need to do, is we need to lean into that discomfort and start talking about race. If you've ever been asked, where are you from? And you say, I'm from Boulder. No, where are you really from? That's a microaggression. And how many of you all get asked that? Where are you from? Where are you really from? It's a very uncomfortable thing. And, I'm shaking because I am uncomfortable. But I want to talk about some of the issues that were mentioned about housing and transportation. Yeah, that's true. That could help some. But I think that fundamentally, our country was founded on genocide, getting rid of the Native Americans here, and slavery. It fundamentally was created on the fact that only people with land could vote, and people of color didn't have any rights. So there's some fundamental things that we have to address, but I think one of the things we need to start doing is recognizing the institutional racism, and I could give you some solid examples of things that are within the city. I'm going to run out of time, and a couple of things that I've done to try and help that out. Do I have time?
You have 15 seconds.
I have 15 seconds. Okay, two committees that I insisted that the city manager reopen so that we had some racial representation in those two committees. One was the Public Participation Working Group, and the other one is the Health Equity Committee, which is still open.
We couldn't hear those committees.
Public Participation Working Group and the Health Equity Committee.
Thank you.
I'm going to try to, we're running out of time, so I'm going to try to combine the next couple of questions. How would you increase representation of people of color to positions of power and decision making? And I will add, especially in the city of Boulder.
Well, the increase of people of color in positions of power and decision-making, I think the city needs to be much more active in recruiting members to those boards and encouraging people of color to run in elections. But most of the boards that we're talking about are appointed by the city council.
John, if I could interrupt you, I'm sorry. I just want to be clear, also city staff positions, because when I go into city council meetings and expert staff is asked to testify, it's rarely a person of color. I'll start you again. I'm sorry to interrupt you. So it's also in staff positions.
Well, all right, to expand my comments to staff, I think the city needs to be advertising its positions more widely than it does. Right now, it advertises them in a government jobs listing, which may not be seen by all the people who should see it. And so I presume there's other methods of advertising which I personally am not familiar with but would encourage. With respect to, and the second point you just raised was the experts who tend to be used on various issues. Well, to be perfectly blunt, on a lot of these issues, there are very few people of color who are experts, but the city might should be more active in seeking out, in considering that aspect of who it recruits for its expert testimony.
You know, you can draw from the pool you have, or you can attempt to change the pool that you draw from. And I think if we just say, well, gee, we need to recruit harder, I think everything John said is worthwhile. But if the pool itself is just what it is, which is not very diverse, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy of well, we don't have a very diverse community, hence we don't have very diverse people on our boards and commissions or our city staff, and around it goes. So we have to actually increase the diversity of the community as a whole, and then subsequently the boards and commissions and stuff will follow. Now, the city can take a leadership role in that by increasing affordability, increasing housing options, and within the communities that we have right now, be actively recruiting more. So I don't know what the within Boulder Housing Partners, within the city of Boulder's managed affordable housing, what the percentage of people of color are. I was actually looking for that today, couldn't find it. But we do need to be recruiting from our citizens base more actively, and one way to do that would be through the use of Boulder Housing Partners and our affordable units.
I have said that I'm going to run one more time, hopefully 4 years or 2 years, whatever I get, hopefully voted into one of those slots. And one of my priorities is to recruit diversity into our boards and commissions. I did that over the last 2 years, not people of color, unfortunately, but I did recruit young people onto several of our boards. I recently discovered that there's a program supported by the county called PEARL, People Engaged in Raising Leaders, and it is 100% on getting people of color and training them, doing leadership development, communication style, budgeting, etc. So I have a young friend in Gun Barrel, and I asked her if she would participate in that, if I would help her, if she would apply, and she did. And there was one small item that she needed help with, and what was that? Childcare. So I was able to give a small amount of assistance to help her overcome the hurdle that she had in participating in this. So this is, I hope, it will be a very valuable program for her, which will help her get ready to then participate in a city or a county board and commission. I'm very committed to doing things like that. And then the second thing I want to address is diversity within the city. The city manager recently hired a chief diversity officer. And I have not spoken publicly about this, but I went to her and told her that I was very critical of that. I don't think it helps to have one person in charge of diversity. I think what she should have done, and I told her this, was she should have told every department head their job is to increase diversity by this amount over this time frame. And only by her, by Jane holding their feet to the fire, will that happen. It will not happen if she just hires one person who can take the heat for everyone else. So I think we're going to have to continue to watch that and reinforce the idea that it's a critical priority for the council.
Well, I'll start with having a broader representation on our boards and commissions. And one thing that you find with boards and commissions is that often people who get elected, they bring people in their networks with them. And what I want to do as one of the younger candidates running is I want to bring people on my networks with me. And I think really what we're seeing in this country is that each generation, as we pass, it has a little more diversity to it. And I really want to bring that to the city council. There are people I'm talking to now that I want to encourage to get involved. And I think when it comes to people who haven't been involved and people who haven't really been asked, you start with asking them. And then, like Jan said, you help them. And I'm committed to doing that. I also want to talk about, let's look at folks at CU. CU as an institution has more diversity than the city as our whole. Let's use that to our advantage. I think that includes both boards and commissions and also city staff, and try to think about how we can bring more people into that sort of mechanism.
So I guess that one of the things that I wanted to point out is if diversity were a function of housing affordability, we'd have a lot of rich people of color living in this town. So it's not about housing. But I do want to comment on Renata Robinson, who is the diversity officer that was hired by the city. And the county also hired someone this year as well. Her name is Courtney Prusman. And Courtney has been holding a lot of conversations, difficult conversations within the county organization. And I would hope that that's what Renata starts to do as well. And, there's, Mark addressed the pipeline issue. And what you want to do is you want to hire, there is quite a bit of diversity actually within the city when you look at the numbers, and which I did last year. The issue is that they're frontline positions. People of color are usually hired as people to work directly with monolingual speaking folks. So what you want is people of color in leadership positions, not the frontline staff. The same is true of the county, where they have quite a few people of color working there, but they're frontline staff. They're not in leadership positions. And oftentimes, they're overlooked for promotions. I also wanted to address one of the, how would you measure success? One of the ways that you could measure success is the Community Foundation has been actually keeping a welcoming some data on that, a couple of metrics on that. And if we could begin to move the needle on how people of color feel, or no, it's just a simple question that says, do you feel that this county is a welcoming and inclusive place? So that's one metric. And the other metric is how welcoming do you feel, how welcoming do you think Boulder County is to immigrants and people of color? And it's just simple questions. So those would be two metrics that I think would work really well. And I think that's all I'll say about that.
So one of the things I was proudest of our council for doing early on when Mary and I started serving together is we had a requirement that boards and commission people be registered electors, that they could vote, that they would be allowed to vote. And we removed that, our council did, so that we could appoint people like Jose Beteta to our boards and commissions and get the input from people who have that kind of perspective. And so I think that was a small step towards being able to be more inclusive and to be inviting of people from all different communities to serve on our boards. And so I think more of that's necessary, removing structural blockages that we may or may not see, and asking the communities that we're interested in having increased the participation, what stops you from doing this? Why is it that there's, what would it take for you to want to serve on a board? Would it take different times? Would it take childcare, which I think is definitely something to think about because it's expensive? What are the structural barriers? And then, as Eric is right about one thing, people do bring their networks, and they encourage them to apply. And I will remember that if I'm reelected, because there's a particular person who's serving on my campaign that I think would be fantastic on one of our boards and commissions. I haven't been able to recruit her in yet, but I will remember to think about that. Other things that the report talks about doing is, of course, more cultural sensitivity training for the staff, right? And because they point out it's not just recruiting, it's also retention. So if you have people of color or lower income that you have in your organization, but they feel the microaggressions that have been described, then they may not stay. And so you have to both create the capacity within the organization for people to be aware of stuff they may not be aware of. Like Mark said, I also need an education. I count on Mary to help me with that. And because, thank you.
This is going to be a lightning round question.
Yep.
So 30 seconds. What is your position on purple cards and driver's licenses for undocumented folks? Go.
It seems similar to the restroom trash on the creek path issue. If you want to solve that, if you want to solve problems of undocumented drivers and stuff, we'll give them documentation.
I would agree with that. I give them documentation that makes them feel secure.
I agree as well, especially when it comes to basic things like having insurance. That's a huge barrier if people don't have a license.
So this is a perfect example of the institutional racism that I was talking about. The legislature approved licenses for undocumented residents and only funded it at a very low level, so that there are 5 places in the whole state that you can actually get a driver's license. But I do support it.
I was happy to see when I went out and double-checked that my memory was correct. Colorado does offer a pathway for undocumented immigrants to get a license, which I think is very good, but it should be adequately funded so that everyone who wants one can get one.
I agree with Mary and Sam on this.
Okay. We are now moving to audience questions. Go ahead, Laurel Herndon, if you don't mind raising.
Here.
I wonder, do you see a connection between the social, racial, and economic issues we've been talking about tonight and actual city decisions, such as allowing Google to build a campus at 30th and Pearl?
Now, did you want that to go to everybody?
Everybody.
Okay, so could you just, could we go back to one?
Thanks.
Jan, you want to take that one? Sure.
I definitely see a connection. And the biggest connection I see is that we have not been building enough housing over the last 20 years. And we have the most restrictive codes and process. There have recently been emails coming in from people who have tried to just put an ADU in their home, which could allow housing for a single person of color or anyone at a lower income, and we make it literally impossible for them. So yes, there is a connection. There's a connection to us turning down housing developments, because housing developments, especially affordable housing, which are often not liked by neighborhoods, often get, or sometimes get turned down, and that has a real impact on the neighborhoods, on people's ability to live here. Another example would be taxes, property taxes.
You're at time.
Okay.
You can finish that sentence, though. Finish the sentence if you want. Go ahead.
I think we could look at some things like, for example, rebates for property taxes for child care facilities. That's one thing I'm looking at right now that would help child care go down.
Would anybody else?
Well, I just want to make a comment about Google generally as an institution. There's a lot of discussion about technology companies and how sometimes they have a bias towards white males as employees. But I want to give my experience working at Seagate Technology for 7 years out in Longmont. And honestly, I worked with some of the most diverse teams that I've ever worked with there. We had teams of Latinos, Indian people, Asian people. And so I don't think companies like Google are fundamentally a problem. That being said, I'd like the city to actually work to develop with the community and the business community just some standard guidelines on diverse hiring practices to ensure that, you know, as they will probably move some folks here as they hire, that, you know, that they're actually hiring from a diverse pool of candidates, which is incredibly important. But I do think just fundamentally, when you bring in a lot of high-paid employees, it's going to continue to put pressure on our community. We need to do more on housing and housing that's sustainable for middle-income people.
So yes, I do see a connection between Google and social, economic, and racial justice issues. Tech companies are notoriously, as Eric said, very geared towards white male. And again, it's kind of going back to the whole institutional issue. It is institutionalized, and there's been a lot of stuff in the media about how some of their practices really work against having women there, are unwelcoming to women. And so I think that also software companies are quite different from disk drive companies, which are Seagate Technologies is, and there isn't quite as much diversity, I imagine, in the software technology companies.
So I certainly do see a connection, and the connection that I see is a little bit different. We need our commercial developers to pay their fair share into the affordable housing funds. And Google, the real missed opportunity with Google is we did not have a linkage fee established. And the linkage fee we set is terribly too low. And so it favors developers building buildings for tech companies rather than building housing for people. And so it was an enormous missed opportunity that we didn't have that in place before. It's an enormous missed opportunity that it's not higher than it is now. It should be triple what it is now because affordable housing is a crisis. And if it's a crisis, we shouldn't have incentives for our developers to be building commercial buildings. It should be on a level playing field, at least with housing, and it is not. And I think that is something that I will focus on if reelected.
Well, this is actually a topic I've thought a lot about because I was on the planning commission that approved the Google development. And I'd like to tell you the concerns that were at least explicitly expressed at that point. The primary concern was with respect to the housing impacts of the Google project. And Sam is absolutely right. The incentives that the city had then and still has lead developers very strongly to build commercial and office type developments rather than housing. And secondly, I can say that the planning commission, or planning board, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say commission, really had no way of dealing with it outside of expressing concern about that impact, because the area in which the Google project has been built is designated for intensive development. And so the trade-off, all right, I'm running out of time, but I'd be happy to talk about the details of that with anybody who's interested.
I don't think that Google in and of itself is the problem, nor do I think that the fact that they're a software company versus a hardware company is inherently a problem. I think that we need to walk our talk on our diversity in our neighborhoods, and that if we want to see a linkage between Google and a lack of housing, great. Let's work on the housing side of this, and we need to do that in a broad sense. We have these community goals. We want more affordable housing for our community. Well, as a community, then we need to tamp down the battles against affordable housing that happen in Palo Parks. That happens in Palo Park, that has happened at 1440 Pine Street, that has happened a number of places where the neighborhoods have risen up and frankly fought against what is a broader community goal. So I want us to walk our talk and to be proactive and fight for affordable housing. Thanks.
I think we've gone through. Did you want to go for more questions?
Go ahead.
One sec, I'll bring you the mic.
I came to Boulder in 1974 for the first time, and it was a different place then. I have lived here for more than 20 years, on and off, and the reason I've come back is because there was always this wonderful sense of community in this town. And I'm very worried for the future of this town with regard to that particular aspect of its creative existence. I've heard everybody speak, and I want you to all know how enormously lucky you are to live in this town with all the wonderful programming and consideration to all the issues that you don't find in other places in the world, and notably in these United States. The two things that worry me the most are taking control of our community back. And that means the municipalization issue, which has not been raised at all here today, and the younger people in the Latino community who are extremely interested in things like renewable energy, but don't really have the chances to get into that business. That is changing, by the way. I'd like to hear each candidate give their little deal about municipalization and the fact that we've worked on this for a long time in the city. We can look at other examples that have been very successful: Chattanooga, Tennessee, Longmont, Colorado, with the cheapest, fastest internet in the United States. We can look at the pathway that Longmont took to actually get their backbone, and that was a SCADA issue between their substations. And they ran fiber for that purpose, and they ran extra fiber, and we're all thankful for that.
So your question is
The question is municipalization and how you all feel about that. There was a baseline 2015 Blue Line questionnaire to all the candidates about how they felt about that. Some people have changed their mind on that. I'd like to hear from you, in particular, Jan Burton, about your changes in that. The other thing I'd like to raise is the award of the Nobel Peace Committee today in Norway, actually in Sweden rather, for the Nobel Award to ICANN. And I'd like to associate how much Boulder has always been linked with nuclear issues, from the time that we were protesting out at Rocky Flats to try and shut it down in the 70s, to the time still now where Rocky Flats is still an issue in our community. I'd like to hear what each candidate feels about things like the aerospace defense facility outside Buckley Air Force Base, which is actually integrally involved with the nuclear issue in that it is the early warning aspect of the American military. So when Mr. Kim Jong-un fires a missile, we know about it in 30 seconds here in Denver. That brings us to the standpoint of changing the perspective that we have about nuclear weapons and working as a community to do that. I'd just like to hear what everybody has to say about that. Thank you.
So that's a two-part question.
Start
Is
her.
it my turn?
I think it was Eric's.
Municipalization, I wrote up my thoughts recently, about a month ago, and I've been a supporter of municipalization. I think the goals are right, to take back local power. But a couple of things changed my mind recently. The biggest thing is that the most important thing to me is decarbonization. And I think there are a couple of ways to get there. And Xcel Energy has finally shown that they have actually moved to try to get to 55% renewable by 2026. There's a proposal to do that. And so a big thing for me is that we've actually seen them move in that direction. The other one is that if we move forward with municipalization, we're going to have at least 5 or 6 more years of litigation. and added costs from what was originally proposed in 2011, and even added costs from just several months ago. So I think in a lot of ways the voters are going to decide this, and personally I will accept either decision as someone who definitely understands that the community is divided on this issue. But that's my perspective as it stands right now. I don't think I have any other comments on the nuclear issue. I'd really be happy to talk to you afterwards.
55%, our goal is 100%. And Excel has not given us any path towards getting to 100%. So make no mistake, this is not about us. It is not about the planet, it's about the future. The planet has survived 5 extinctions, it will survive 6. It's about saving ourselves. With respect to a just transition, which is what it became named when we did the climate commitment, it came before council, and I raised it as an issue of, are we making sure that this has a social justice piece to it? And happily, staff heard that, and they actually created a partnership with the university and created this just transition piece of it, which the university just recently hired a person to follow through on it and do exactly what you were talking about. I support municipalization, and all good things take time and perseverance.
So I think everyone's probably pretty clear where I stand on this. It is an issue of, I think, climate justice, and we're trying to do our part to get to 100% as fast as we can. We're being opposed by a vertically integrated corporate monopoly who sends 30 million plus a year out of our community to Minneapolis. I do not think that we should take this issue of climate change, which is an issue of social injustice, lightly. It should be taken very seriously. There are 3 existential threats to the human race. There's climate change, there's an asteroid, and then there's nuclear war. And we can't do so much about nuclear war here except for speak out, but we can take serious action on both empowering our community to make decisions about energy, cleaning up our carbon emissions, increasing our reliability, and increasing the ability to roll out broadband for our community. Government does good things. Sometimes when the corporate monopolies stand in front of you, like they did in Longmont in the 20s, when Longmont wanted to form its municipal utility, you just have to keep going. They had a 10-year fight with Excel to get their public utility, and they're twice as reliable as we are. Fort Collins is 5 times as reliable as we are, and the people in those towns get to make the decision about what is a just transition.
Gerstle. I support the municipalization effort for reasons that Sam and Mary have just given you, and I won't repeat. But I would like to mention it from a different viewpoint. This is an example of what I regard as a pay-it-forward issue. And that is, we are making the sacrifice for something that our kids will be grateful for that we did, in the way that Sam just described Longmont carried out in the 1920s. We owe it to our kids to do this. And the other aspect that so far hasn't been very much mentioned is Boulder has adopted climate goals that we cannot reach if we stay with Excel, because Excel has stated their plans to convert to 50% or 55% sometime far hence. And that is way too slow for us to accomplish what we have already determined we wish to do.
So I believe, A, in our climate goals, B, that yes, it is a social justice issue, and I believe that it's urgent that we begin to work on our climate goals. I voted for the muni the first 2 times out, and I actively campaigned for it. I have changed my mind and am no longer supporting municipalization as a path for Boulder at this time. And I say that as someone that has put thermal and photovoltaic solar systems on the last 3 houses I've owned. I own a small commercial property out in the county. I'm putting the maximum solar system I can there. And when I look at our progress and I look at the battles ahead of us, and Excel is only doing what any corporation does. They're fighting for their survival. And we have a government structure. We have a PUC. And when I look forward and I say, yes, it's difficult, and difficult things are many times worthwhile. But then you also look and you say, what can you do with that money? What can you do with that effort otherwise? And for me, the path forward with distributed power systems, solar systems subsidized on our middle and lower income housing, actually reducing Boulder's carbon footprint, not just on our electricity, but on our natural gas and our transportation goals are equally important, and we need to use that money to achieve our goals now.
I just got a text that my electricity down. Excel is not my favorite. I've told them I think they should become a B Corp. You know what a B Corp is? They're much more socially oriented. And that's what I think a utility should be. Nevertheless, I have changed my mind. I am an environmentalist. I definitely all along supported the objectives of municipalization. I honor those people who worked so hard for it for so many years. But we've seen the regulatory and legal issues just thrown at us again and again and again. And the costs are skyrocketing. So when I look at social issues, I look at the possibility that our children will be paying these bills that we think are going to be lower, but they cannot be lower because the costs are going to be so high. When I look at Longmont and Fort Collins, they did this back in the 20s when it was much easier to do than it is now. And also, I would encourage you to go on their sites and look at their percentage of renewables. They are nowhere close to where we are already, and they don't. If they have better reliability, that's great, but they're not going to accomplish what we are. My feeling is that we need to work with Denver, with other communities who have the same goals, and continue to push at the state level and excel. And perhaps our state legislators would be willing to actually take away the monopoly, which would be good for all choice in Colorado. Thank you.
Let's see. We have 1, 2, and 3, and 4. And please make your question very quick, and we'll give you 1 minute.
So I have one thing. I'm super concerned about your Google answer, frankly. The Google answer. If you think Google isn't a problem racially, it's a concern. They only have 31% women in their workforce. They have 2% Black, 3% Latinx. If you think that's not a problem, you're bringing in one of the whitest, most segregated companies into one of the most white, segregated towns. So I'm just letting you know, especially the white guys on the panel, your lack of racial analysis is super concerning to me. So my question is that if you are so willing to have housing be a concern and like the amount of taxes, would you be willing to ask businesses that come into this town that they hire based on what the American population looks like? Because that happens. Intel does it. They're trying to get their workforce to look like the American population. San Francisco has said you don't get to be here unless you have domestic partner benefits. So there's precedent for that, and I want you to think about that. Would you be willing to say, no, man, you don't get to headquarter here unless you hire people at the population that America looks like?
Did you want to address that to everybody?
Yeah, well, whoever. No, in the interest of time, one of the white guys, I actually don't care. That guy in the pink shirt.
So, yes, I would. And in fact, it's actually on my list of things to do with the economic sustainability strategy that's coming before us next year, is to use that document to actually implement some of the things in the
welcoming and inclusive study that was done to pair those two. And yes, it's something that I actually thought about.
Yeah, one of the things that I mentioned when I spoke about this is that I think we should, as a community, we should agree on diverse hiring practices, and that means that I think that's kind of the first step of that process, which is make sure that when you're making any hiring decision, that before you actually hire someone, that you actually interview a diverse set of candidates. And I would start there, and then see if we could go towards moving to an actual requirement.
Well, as a white guy, I appreciate, I want to understand and appreciate the information you've given me. Again, I just struggle with the idea that we have building and permitting processes, we have a structure, and I don't know exactly the mechanism we would use to just deny or accept a corporation based on their current set of racial diversity. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for you.
Just jam on the speed.
Oh, hold on. Jumped up.
Can I throw one thing in for you guys to consider on this question, which is we as a community fought Walmart coming for years. They eventually only came in because they bought a building that they didn't have to do anything to. So that was their mechanism, was they just said, we'll take whatever building that we can get. And then they got in, and now they're gone again. I don't know why that is. But there is an influence that we as a community can have because we managed to do that with Walmart.
Well, do you want me to answer the question about the high-tech companies? I was a high-tech exec. I was in the high-tech industry for 30 years, all over the world. So, I can speak as a woman who was in high-tech. I ran a European operation in my last job, and I was the only woman, and I had to continue to harangue my guys about hiring more women, which I did. So, I've got a really good African-American friend who got recruited here to Boulder for a CU job, and he got, at the same time he was being recruited to a university in Denver. So he gets out of the car and looks around Boulder. What does he see? Where are my peaks? Where's my church? So there was nothing here for him. So, it is not going to be an easy thing to go to. I don't mind going to Google's executive. I can stand toe-to-toe with any of those guys and say, you need to hire diversity. And they're going to, one of the things they're going to say is, okay, where's my base of people? And we don't have a high base of people because, honestly, CU is not that diverse. So this is going to take a lot of hard effort for many, many years. And I have no problem standing up to any executive and say, let's work on a plan. But the city's going to have to step up too and show, put their money where their mouth is.
John Gerstle?
I think I mentioned before that I was on the planning board that approved the Google project. And I can also say that this was not even on the horizon of consideration for the planning board. And it perhaps should have been. But I can also say that I don't believe that the city has anything other than a cultural or a moral basis for pushing Google on this front. I find it difficult to imagine that the city could impose a legal requirement on Google to make this happen. But I think the city should consider it, and I would support that.
So I think your statistics were not that surprising to me. I certainly believe them, but they're starker than I would have imagined, to be honest. I think Mary's got it right about we need to focus on the economic sustainability strategy, bringing social justice issues into it, because it's generally not. Those conversations don't happen in that venue. It's usually about a focus affordable spaces for small businesses locally and things of that nature. I would be very curious to learn more about the San Francisco measure that you referenced, because to me, it certainly seems like that could be brought in as part of the economic sustainability strategy and then made into an ordinance once we've learned more about it. So it's an interesting concept. Thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you. Back.
In the back with the hat.
Hi there. I'm a former Marine. I was a foster child. I was locked away in a shelter with an 18-year-old black guy who beat the living crap out of me. So I might have some prejudice, but at the same time, I believe in diversity. And I was homeless for about 6 years. I experienced firsthand police beating me, tasing me, and putting a net over my face because I was spitting up when they put mace in my face in both eyes. I'm now in an apartment, and I've been there for 5 years. And part of my frustration is the laws of this city make it almost impossible for me to help anybody because I might lose my own housing. So I'm trying to do all that I can to get an actual home so that I can then invite people in where they feel safe, where they don't feel like their worth is measured by how much money they make. I want to ask you a question about the police force. Would you be willing to entice people who've been formerly homeless and people who are of a different race into the police force so that they interact one-on-one with the people on the street and with other people of this community? I guess that's it.
Well, thanks for sharing your perspective. I do believe that your idea could be useful. As I said before, one of the things that's happened in the last 4 years is we have 2 officers who are part of the homeless outreach team, and their job is to not enforce against people without shelter, but to make sure that they understand that people aren't committing crimes within the community and to understand that better. Your experience would help with that. I think it would be interesting for you to speak with Chief Testa and talk with him about the idea. He's an extremely community-centered police chief, and the EDGE program is another thing that we brought in, and de-escalation training is another thing. And the EDGE program is when there's a problem with a person who appears unsheltered and it seems to arise from a mental illness basis, they call mental health partners and they bring in an expert to help not only de-escalate the situation, but understand what kind of assistance that person might need in addition. So, we continue to try and have as community-focused police set of responses as we can. So I'd be happy to talk with you more afterwards.
Well, I agree with what Sam said, but to answer your question, I would say yes. I think the police force would benefit from having folks with the experience and background that you've described. But of course, the police have to understand that that's who's coming also, and that's why they're there.
Sure, absolutely. Our police force, like any police force, would be improved by greater racial diversity and greater diversity in background. And I think veterans are an area that we could recruit our police force from military veterans, especially from diverse backgrounds and from people that have been homeless before.
And I'm not just speaking about myself. I'm
speaking about but I'm
different races.
Sure, but also with your experience would inform your experiences could certainly inform a police force as well. I just want to mention that in support of our police force and some current policies that they have, I attended a Boulder Housing Partners, our community housing program, their board meeting early this year, and a group of homeless people that are now housed, have homes, awarded 2 officers an award for their work, and that I think you were referring to that. We have 2 officers that are kind of dedicated to working with homeless populations, and their testimony was really powerful in support of these officers.
You going to help me after? Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and I would encourage the police force to do that.
I also support that idea. I'm really curious about the best ways to reach out in the community and find folks of the caliber that you're talking about. I think in a lot of ways, the police department, just like a lot of other city departments, we talk about diverse hiring practices and doing more to make sure that the police are also following those hiring practices as well, and see if we can strengthen those.
First of all, I'm sorry that happened to you. And I think it's a great idea what you presented. There's, I think, a small thing at the state level that might get in the way. And that's a little box in applications that asks whether or not you've been in prison, which it sounds like you may have been. I don't know. But I'll make that assumption. And in those cases in which people have been in prison, they check the box, boom, out goes your application. There have been efforts at the state level to ban the box, and it has not been passed.
Judith?
Something that affects everybody equally is nuclear weapons. And there are many nuclear activists in Boulder, and many of us are really partly responsible for what happened in Oslo, Norway today, and that we have the Nobel Peace Prize. And so join the Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center. Call me, I'm Judith Moline, if you're interested in being an anti-nuclear activist. And nuclear waste affects all of us equally. Although that's not quite accurate, it affects children worse than us, than adults, because cancer takes a long time. We're trying desperately to keep Rocky Flats closed forever, and I'd love to know what you think of that. And we have a current campaign, Keep Kids Off Rocky Flats. How do you feel about it?
Thank you.
So I have to admit that Rocky Flats wasn't something that I followed very closely. However, the trail did come before us earlier this year, where there were, it had to do with how they monitor the nuclear waste on the site, and they were making an effort to raise the funding to put a trail in there. And if I recall correctly, the monitoring was kind of tied to where the trail went, and the effort was to get the money and get the monitoring and get the trail so that it went around the site and not through the site. And that's about the extent of my knowledge, so I really can't address your question.
So I'm Lisa Morzel's backup alternate on the Rocky Flats Stewardship Committee, and so I recently took a tour out there of the entire facility, and it's clear that there are places there that you don't want people going, for sure. There are also places where nature has taken back over, and it certainly seems like you could conceivably do a trail there, but Mary's point is exactly right. The measuring and the monitoring is the most important thing about determining whether it's okay. I think there were 2 proposed trail alignments, and one of which looks like a bad idea to me, and that's one that goes more centrally on the site. And then there's one that's all the way at the edge of the site, which I think probably has less exposure. But a key part to knowing whether it makes sense to do this is in the context, I'm sorry, of the Rocky Mountain Greenways, so it's an attempt to connect like from DIA all the way out to Rocky Mountain National Park with a series of trails, which is a great idea, and I will be curious to see what the testing shows on that western trail alignment.
I'm interested to see what the testing shows on that western trail alignment. But before that, I wouldn't be willing to approve any trail there.
So I've been campaigning on evaluating data, and I too am interested in the data, and if the data shows that, in fact, a particular alignment can be done safely, and people have the choice to visit Rocky Flats on a particular alignment that's been shown to be safe, then I would be in favor of it.
We had a city council decision maybe 6 months ago whether we should invest money, and I am the only city council person who voted against that.
Hey, I think my answer is largely along the lines of the others. I was at the city council meeting in the past year looking at some of these trail alignments, and I'm really interested in what the data says. And I think part of the discussion too was how would use or of people on the trails potentially affects the dispersion of radioactive materials, and that's also something that we need to evaluate, but also we need to know that there are some uncertainties there as well.
All right, we had one more question. I don't remember what it was. Okay.
Thank you. First of all, I'd just like to say that I was homeless when I first came to Boulder, and the things that the gentleman over here mentioned are not shocking to me at all. I witnessed firsthand the targeting of the homeless community by the police. So just to put that out there. I just have one particular question about housing, and that is, when you mention affordable housing, a lot of young people like me, we've had to get roommates and, have a lot of people in an apartment to afford it. But we have this law that you can't have more than, is it 3 or 4 people who are not family members in a housing unit? And it just seems like that would be a simple law to overturn, which would address some of these issues of affordable housing.
Grab the mic, please.
Did you want a response?
Yeah.
Let's start with you, Jan. You got
All
it.
right, I'll start. California got rid of the occupancy limits back in the 70s, and I don't think they've quite fallen off of the United States, so it didn't kill them. I personally believe we should blow that up. I very much believe that this is a different world than the world was when we created these occupancy limits. It's no longer the Leave It to Beaver family living in Boulder. So, however, those of us on council took a huge amount of abuse, and the people who are living in co-ops took a huge amount of abuse when we passed that ordinance. So we saw very clearly this community is not supportive of that kind of thing. So I think, I personally believe we should get rid of occupancy limits, but I don't think the council should do it without some sort of mandate from the community, and that to me would be a ballot measure. And I would love to see some people come up with a ballot measure. There is all kind of environmental data that supports this is the best thing to do for achieving our environmental objectives, and certainly the CU campus would support it. And I think what we will see with the co-op ordinance is we will show that that works in this community.
I'm largely where Jan is. I worked really heavily on the cooperative housing ordinance last year. My friends are here tonight, and in a lot of ways, they brought me into the community that they've developed, and that's been incredibly powerful for me. But the thing that we didn't solve with cooperative housing is, what do you do with people, 4 people unrelated in the home? What do you do with 5 people? People that are just looking for an option that is slightly more affordable for them. And that's a problem that we didn't address and we still have in this community. I was gathering signatures last year for the ballot measure that some of my friends were putting together, trying to get on the ballot that we could set occupancy at 1 person per bedroom, something that is fairly reasonable. I think when you look at the housing stock that we have in Boulder, we largely have single-family homes, and we largely have lots of empty bedrooms. Unfortunately, that effort wasn't successful. I think that kind of thing is a great way forward because so many people in Boulder say, wait, there's occupancy limits? Wait, that's unbelievable. I would say some things that the council could do in the meantime. We could potentially push the occupancy up to 4 unlimited people throughout the entire city. That would be something that could have some balance between the different neighborhoods. We could also look at something like senior occupancy that was proposed a couple of years ago that would allow 6 seniors to live together. That's a small piece of the solution, and even that got heavy opposition. But I think now is the time that we need to actually take some action because kicking people out of their homes for being over-occupied is not just.
So it sounds like a simple thing that you could resolve. We do have the question of the university being here and the university having endless enrollment. So if the university did 2 things, one is cap their enrollment and B, build enough housing for their students, I think this would be an easy issue to address. But until the university does that, we simply can't. They would essentially become overoccupied by students and it would present an issue within neighborhoods. So it sounds like an easy thing to do, it sounds like something we should do, but when you're faced with the realities of the issue, it's way more complicated than it sounds.
So the other complexity with this is what it does to property values. So if you can rent to 6 renters or 7 renters legally in whatever format you allow it, then the home prices rise. And so then it becomes even more unaffordable to have middle-income home ownership, and you also get a lot more investors coming in. And so the Hill is the classic example of this, because there's a lot of illegally over-occupied places on the Hill, and the landlords are paying a lot of money, and they're eroding any family occupation up there, and it's becoming mostly a student-focused area. So I would say, I agree with Jan on this point, that if the town is ready for it, that a resolution that comes from the people would be a clear mandate that that's what we need to do. And I think that in the absence of that, the co-op ordinance was an attempt, and I supported it ultimately, to have a path towards that for people who are willing to put the time in to form a collective. And we intentionally gave the license to the group of people and not to the property. So it's really more focused on the group of people that want to live together and the pathway that they can get to do that.
It's ironic that we're here talking about this from this angle because several of us last night were in University Hill talking to the folks who are concerned about the situation that Sam and Mary have described. And I think it is absolutely relevant because I'm one of the people who had to move away because I couldn't afford to stay in the Hill because it was so profitable for the landlord to rent to many people rather than one family with 2 kids. So the reason I mention this is to just demonstrate that there are consequences that need to be carefully considered before lifting occupancy limits.
I talked earlier about policing and fairness and trust. And I think that this enters into the intersection of the number of unrelated people living together and familial status. And so I would advocate for, yes, eliminating familial status as a determination of whether or not a home is acceptable for 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 people or however many it is, because that's an issue of safety. It's an issue of good neighborliness. Can the people occupying the home perform their duties as a neighbor? And do we have fair and trustworthy enforcement of nuisance ordinances? Do they have loud parties? Do they violate our noise ordinance? Do they shovel their walks? And I think that we need to tie that, in fact, enforcement of those ordinances back to the ownership of the house as well as the occupants of the house. But I know from having raised high school kids, sometimes in my family of 4, we had 4 cars. My kids had parties. We were loud. We were not necessarily the best neighbors. And so familial status, I think, is the wrong determining factor in that regard. Are we done?
Yes, we're done. I would like to make an exception and take one more question. We had a request, but could you hold that mic too?
Just into the microphone.
What are your reviews on DACA?
Just start here and go.
Sure.
I was very happy the city council could respond to that very quickly with a resolution, so that the day after, I don't know what to call him, our fearless leader, did that stupid thing of getting rid of the DACA Act, which is deferred action on people who were brought here as a child. So the city has stood with our dreamers, and I was proud to do so.
I think it was terrible that DACA was ended by our president, and I think the city did exactly the right thing in its response.
I agree with Sam and John, and I feel like I'm part of the resistance against Trump and that sort of policy.
I agree with that, and I think we need to continue to put pressure on our national legislators to fix this problem for once and for all. They have got to step up and get it fixed.
I agree with all that. As in a personal capacity and potentially as a city councilor, I will continue to speak out and support dreamers in our country.
So Sam and I co-authored that resolution that came before council, and I think that that was a tiny little thing that we could do. But there are also people that are getting deported. On Wednesday, there's a hearing for the brother of a friend of mine. My friend is DACA, and her brother is getting a deportation hearing. He's married to a school teacher in Columbine, and what is happening in this country about separating families is terrible, terrible. My friend's other brother has already been deported. He was deported to a country he'd never been to. He didn't even speak the language. So it's terrible about DACA, but it's also terrible to people that weren't able to get DACA. They're getting deported left and right.
Thank you so much for turning out tonight. This forum was put together very quickly and with a lot of support, and we really appreciate your time. And a big appreciation to the panelists for showing up. I want to mention that a couple of people who didn't show up wanted to respond to the questions. We'll take their responses and publish them on the nationreport.org. I also would like to suggest that for those of you who don't list your email addresses on your websites, that that would make you more easily accessible, and you know your email address is on there. Ballots go out October 16th. Boulder Rights Watch, of all of the partners up here, is the only group who is able to legally support a candidate. So they will decide their endorsements, and we'll announce that on the Nation Report. Thank you.
Thank you all. Glad you could make it, Mary. I say I'm glad you could make it.
Oh, thanks.